Chapter 1. The Vanished Melody. A bitter gust rattled the windows of Hercule Poirot's Baker Street flat, stirring a swirl of frost across the sills as the great clock in the hall struck 9. Within his neat sitting room, the air was rich with the scent of dark chocolate and the sharp tang of freshly inked paper. Poirot sat behind his mahogany desk, his perfect black suit unruffled, his cravat as immaculately tied as his moustaches, and his little grey cells already at work on the day's correspondence. Yet even the most riveting telegram or most cryptic letter could not prepare him for the urgent summons that arrived in the form of a frail, elegantly wrapped visitor. A timid knock preceded the entrance of a slender woman draped in sable furs. Her cheeks were drawn, her hands trembled, and she carried under her arm a small rosewood box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. Her voice wavered as she greeted him. "Monsieur Poirot, forgive my intrusion at this hour, but I have nowhere else to turn." She placed the music box upon his desk with a reverence that spoke of deep anxiety. Impression flickered in her eyes as Poirot examined the exquisite craftsmanship. Brass hinges etched with floral scrolls, a tiny brass key lying solitary beside, the lid and inlaid petals that caught the lamplight like dew on evening blossoms. Poirot raised an eyebrow, his curiosity fully awakened. "Madam, this is a most elegant little instrument, but—" He tapped the box gently. "It seems silent." He lifted the lid and peered at the gleaming metal cylinder. Ah, the cylinder is blank, smooth and unmarred. Yet here one would expect the delicate grooves of a lullaby. The visitor sank into a chair, dabbing her eyes with a lace-edged handkerchief. "My name is Mrs. Adelaide Montfort. My daughter Eloise is 7 years old. Each night she sings a lullaby, La Berceuse de l'Étoile, an old French tune she learned in infancy. Without it, she cannot sleep. 2 weeks ago she awoke, terrified. The melody vanished from her mind. I found the box wound on her bedside table, but when I tried the key, no tune. The cylinder had been replaced with this blank." Poirot's chin bore a thoughtful crease. "A curious predicament. You believe the cylinder was swapped, and the melody itself has departed your daughter's memory." Mrs. Montfort nodded, her breath quavering. "She is inconsolable. I feared a childish prank at first, but when I questioned the staff and re-examined the cabinet, I realized it was no mere trick. The grooves are gone, monsieur. The tune is stolen." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured, adjusting his pince-nez. "Then we face a theft, not of gold or jewels, but of innocence and memory. A crime most unsettling." He stood and fetched a white cloth, placing the box upon it as if it were a precious heirloom. "Madame, I shall accept your case. We must uncover who had access to this box, how they removed the cylinder, and crucially, what has become of the stolen melody." Over the next hour, Mrs. Montfort described her household. After her husband's untimely death, she had entrusted the management of her Georgian townhouse in Kensington to a small staff. Nurse Harriet Bennet, Eloise's devoted caretaker, Mr. Giles Harper, the butler of impeccable manners, Agnes Larkin, the parlour-maid, and a newcomer, Miss Emmeline Rhodes, Eloise's music tutor. Nurse Harriet kept the silver key to the cabinet in Eloise's room. Miss Rhodes taught scales on the pianoforte, but had never heard the lullaby. Mr. Harper oversaw the corridors, and Agnes served tea each morning. Poirot listened attentively, making precise notes. We shall begin by examining the nursery. Show me the cabinet in which the box was kept." Soon they stood in Eloise's room, a child's haven of pastel shades and soft carpets. The brass bedstead bore a neatly folded quilt. A framed portrait of Eloise in a flowered nightgown gazed down, and the small cabinet stood beside the fireplace. Nurse Harriet, summoned as witness, produced the silver key on a ribbon at her throat. Poirot accepted it with thanks and opened the cabinet. Inside lay, beneath a lace doily, the identical music box, its cylinder now blank, its tune gone. Poirot removed the cylinder and examined it under the lamp. No trace of markings, no chip at the edge to betray its removal. It was as if it had been replaced by an artisan's perfect forgery. He replaced the cylinder and closed the cabinet. Standing in the lamplit nursery, he surveyed the scene with acute attention. The polished floorboards, the window slightly ajar, a child's shoe left by the bed. His gaze fell on the brass lamp near the window. A faint smear of soot marked its rim, a silent clue. Returning to the sitting room, he placed the recovered cylinder on the desk alongside the original blank. "Madam," he said, "this cylinder has been swapped once more, but our thief left no tool marks. Whoever did this possesses both skill and familiarity with fine mechanism. Moreover, the soot on the lamp suggests someone approached the window by night." Mrs. Montfort blinked in alarm. Could it be one of the servants? Perhaps, Poirot conceded. Yet the newcomer, Miss Rhodes, as music tutor, would know the mechanics of a music box, knowing how to remove and replace a cylinder. Nurse, Harriet keeps the key, but she would have no motive. The butler, disciplined as he is, has access to every room. And Agnes, though unskilled, might have observed a secret passage, known to few, connecting corridors. Poirot rose, his decision swift. "We must interview each staff member discreetly. But first, I wish to test whether the missing melody might still exist somewhere in this house. Let us wind the original cylinder on the blank box. Listen, and see if the mechanism, unharmed, speaks at all." With delicate care, he wound the cylinder. The box clicked, but remained silent. "As I thought, the grooves are gone entirely. Madam, I propose we keep this original cylinder under my protection tonight, and guard the cabinet ourselves. Pray, arrange for a watch. Nurse Harriet until 9, Captain Hastings until midnight, and then I shall sit vigil until dawn." Mrs. Montfort agreed without hesitation. That evening the household retired early. Hastings relieved Nurse Harriet precisely at 9, and at 12 he slipped away to his own bed, leaving Poirot alone with the silent box. In the hush of midnight, Poirot sat in an armchair beside the cabinet, his cane at hand, his tousled hair evoking the keen mind within. At 1:15, a faint click echoed in the corridor. Poirot rose, torch in hand. A slender figure cloaked in dark fabric slipped through the nursery door. Poirot called, "Halt!" The intruder paused, then dashed past him with astonishing agility, carrying the music box. Poirot gave chase, but the thief, moving like a dancer, vanished down the back stairway. Returning to the nursery, Poirot found the cylinder box once more blank. Back in the drawing room at dawn, Hastings learned the box was stolen yet again. Poirot, unflappable, laid out the recovered cylinder and the blank one. He tapped the desk. "Our thief is bold and precise. She must know every hidden panel of this house. And note, the form was feminine. We have not one but two ladies of skill and motive. Miss Rhodes, the musician yearning to compose her own lullaby, and perhaps someone else longing for solace in melody. He summoned the staff to the drawing-room. Nurse Harriet, Agnes Larkin, Mr. Harper, and Miss Rhodes assembled, blinking at the pale morning. Poirot surveyed them with piercing calm. "Mesdames, et monsieur, the music box has been stolen thrice. A woman entered this nursery at midnight, removing and replacing the cylinder each time. We have a trace of soot at the lamp brim, and the intruder possesses intimate knowledge of the box's mechanism. I ask you each, did you wear rouge last night?" Silence fell. Nurse Harriet's hands trembled. Agnes shifted uneasily. Mr. Harper stood immovable. Miss Rhodes drew in her breath. Poirot produced a swab of red powder from his pocket. This was found on the back-stair landing. Rouge belonging to a lady, or to a performer who wore it. He advanced on Miss Rhodes. "You are a musician and perhaps a performer. Tell me, did you possess rouge that night?" Miss Rhodes's eyes darted. "No, monsieur, I do not wear makeup." "And yet you were seen near the boathouse lantern, retrieving your shawl," Hastings interjected. "Your scarf was found, draped on the banister." Miss Rhodes's composure cracked. She dropped into a chair. "It was mine, yes, but I fetched it from the garden. I never meant harm." Poirot held up the recovered cylinder, examining it once more. "Your motive, mademoiselle, though tender, was misplaced. You wished to gift Eloise a new lullaby of your own composition, believing her lost melody irretrievable. You removed the cylinder 3 times to perfect your own tune until guilt overtook you." Tears glistened on Miss Rhodes's lashes. "I only wanted to soothe her. I am sorry." Mrs. Montfort rose and embraced her. "We understand. You shall teach Eloise your lullaby in time. But tonight let us restore her own melody once more." So it was that, under Poirot's guidance, the original cylinder, a masterpiece restored by a skilled artisan, was placed back in the box. Eloise, guided by her nurse and her impulsive tutor, sang her own lullaby as the notes danced once more from the music box. The gentle melody flowed through the corridors of the Kensington house like a balm, and at last little Eloise's breath evened, her fears laid to rest. Later, in the cosy warmth of Baker Street, Poirot and Hastings settled. Before the fire, Hastings sipped his tea. Another curious case solved, Hercule. A stolen lullaby and a thief driven by longing, not malice. Poirot smiled contentedly. "Indeed, mon ami, in human hearts lie melodies both sweet and sorrowful. Our task is to preserve the genuine tune, and in so doing, heal the silent fractures that follow the theft of memory." He closed his eyes in satisfaction. "And now, perhaps another cup of chocolate, sweet as truth restored." Chapter 2. Shadows in the Nursery. The morning light in Mrs. Montfort's Kensington townhouse filtered through heavy draperies, in a muted haze, as if reluctant to disturb the subdued hush that had settled over the household. Eloise Montfort, her cheeks still flushed from the night's sweet slumber, sat at the breakfast table, humming her restored lullaby as Nurse Harriet poured cream into her porridge. But behind the child's bright eyes, worry had taken root. The melody that comforted her so thoroughly had been stolen once more. Captain Hastings arrived shortly after, carrying a steaming tray of tea and buttered toast. His cheerful demeanour faltered when he saw Nurse Hodgson's drawn face. "Good morning, old girl," he said gently. "How is our little songbird?" Nurse Harriet shook her head, glancing at the music box perched upon the sideboard. She wound it as always at 8:30, but the melody did not play. She motioned to the box. The cylinder lay empty once more. Hastings's brow furrowed. "Again?" "Yes," Mrs. Montfort confirmed, entering the room with a porcelain cup in her hand. "Last night I heard Eloise crying instead of singing. When I went to comfort her, I found the cylinder missing from the box altogether." She drew a deep breath. "We are undone, Captain. She cannot sleep without her lullaby." Hastings set down the tray with a soft clatter. "This is most disturbing. And you say the cylinder is gone this time?" "Gone, monsieur," Nurse Harriet answered. "Neither in the nursery nor in the panel where Monsieur Poirot recovered it last time." Poirot himself appeared in the doorway, his cravat immaculate, his expression grave yet poised. "Ah," he murmured, striding into the breakfast-room. "I trust no ill has befallen the melody since our last success." "Alas, dear monsieur," Mrs. Montfort said with a tremor in her voice. "By dawn the cylinder had vanished, and Eloise's song is silenced yet again." Poirot nodded slowly. "Then we confront a thief more determined, one who dares strike despite our vigilance. We must assume this intruder knows every hidden passage of the house and every watchful eye posed to intercept her. But first, I propose a small demonstration." He excused himself and returned moments later with the copyist's cylinder in his gloved hands, the one last restored under his direction. He placed it gently back in the rosewood box and wound the key once. For a moment, the familiar strains of La Berceuse de l'Étoile filled the room, sweet and unwavering. Eloise's eyes brightened until a sudden click silenced the box. The melody had faltered in mid-tune. Captain Hastings sprang to his feet. "By Jove, it has been sabotaged!" Poirot set down the cylinder, examining the box's interior under the lamplight. "Note the cylinder smiles no more grooves, despite being the one we tested. Our adversary has replaced it again with a fresh blank, and this time has managed to return even the copyist's work to its original state." He frowned, fingertips tapping the table. "We have a fiendish rival. Fascinating, yet worrisome." Mrs. Montfort wrung her hands. "But how can we protect the box? We keep it under lock and key, under watch. Yet again, the melody is stolen." Poirot raised a calming hand. "Madame, the melody itself remains safe. This second thief merely replaces cylinders, thinking to confound us. But the grooves left in the original, disparate from the blank cylinders, mark the genuine tune. We must secure that original cylinder and bait our culprit into revealing herself." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, will you arrange for the original cylinder's concealment, perhaps within the one place she would never suspect, and then retire early? I shall take the watch this night." Hastings bowed. "At once, monsieur." Later that afternoon, Hastings placed the real cylinder, its delicate ridges intact, inside the locked cabinet in the nursery, sliding a fresh blank in its stead. With the two cylinders thus switched, he withdrew to his quarters, confident that Poirot's waiting would catch the thief unawares. When the clock in the hall told midnight, Poirot emerged from his dressing gown and took position beside Eloise's cabinet, his small body half shrouded by the silken curtains. The autumn wind rattled the window panes. Beyond, the hush of Kensington streets pressed in. Poirot's basalt black eyes gleamed as he waited. At 1:45, a shadow slipped through the corridor. Without a sound, the intruder, cloaked as before, glided to the cabinet, lifted the doily, and withdrew a cylinder from the box. Poirot stepped from the gloom. "Bonsoir!" he exclaimed. The figure leapt, cylinder in hand, but Poirot, swift as a sleuthing cat, seized the cloak and wrenched it free. The intruder stumbled, revealing the elegant profile of Miss Emmeline Rhodes, her powdered cheek faintly smudged with rouge. Poirot held the lantern aloft. "Ah, mademoiselle, not the new tutor, but the same gentle hand once more." Miss Rhodes, flushed and trembling, tried to snatch back the cylinder. "Let me go!" she cried. I can explain." Hastings burst into the room, candle in hand, and gently pried the cylinder from her fingers. "Confound it, Rhodes! What have you done this time?" Miss Rhodes sank to her knees, tears slipping freely. I did not mean to steal the real one. I thought your replacements were the originals. Each time I took one, I returned it, believing it still blank. My mind awhirl with guilt, I did not recognize your decoy." Poirot's mouth curved in a wry smile. "Thus you replaced the genuine cylinder once more, only to find each a fresh blank, designed by myself precisely to expose our perp." He offered her a hand. "Rise, mademoiselle. The melody is safe, exposed only by your affectionate mistake." Nurse Harriet clutched her shawl, her eyes wide. "Emmeline, you have tortured our poor child for days on end." "I only wished to help," Miss Rhodes sobbed. "Oh, I thought if Eloise forgot her lullaby, I could teach her my own composition, one I wrote for my own lost sister. I believed I was doing good." Mrs. Montfort approached, tender severity in her eyes. "You were misled by your own compassion, child. But you must now restore the melody in full." By dawn's first grey glow, Poirot had arranged for a skilled engraver to recut the original grooves on a fresh cylinder, this one more securely sealed within the music box's interior. Eloise, guided by Nurse Harriet and Miss Rhodes, wound the box and waited, her small hands trembling. The first strains of La Berceuse de l'Étoile rang out, soft as moonlight across a still pond. Eloise's face broke into a radiant smile, and she slept once more in peaceful repose. Later, in Baker Street, Poirot poured himself a cup of steaming chocolate. Hastings joined him, settling into the familiar wingback chair. Another lullaby, restored, this time through a merry-go-round of replacement cylinders. Hastings chuckled. Poirot sipped his chocolate thoughtfully. "Mon ami, this case proves that even the gentlest of intentions can lead one astray. Our Miss Rhodes's heart was in the right place, yet her actions brought sorrow before joy. But tonight, a genuine melody soothes a child's dreams, a most excellent outcome." Hastings raised his cup in salute. To the melody returned, and to the little grey cells that compose our sweetest victories. Poirot smiled as he clinked his cup against Hastings's. Outside, the wind sighed through the frosted windows, and within, the soft murmur of solved mysteries, whispered promises of further adventures yet to come. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Forgotten. Versailles' drowsy stillness enveloped Mrs. Montfort's household for 2 days after Eloise's lullaby was finally restored. The parlours were once again filled with cheerful chatter. Nurse Harriet's footsteps fell lightly in the corridors. Even Miss Rhodes greeted her pupils with renewed confidence rather than guilt-laden hesitation. Yet in Poirot's mind there stirred an uneasy suspicion. He had watched Miss Rhodes's confession, her tears and contrition genuine, but the pattern of 3 thefts, each more brazen than the last, seemed too artfully arranged for one misguided soul. There remained the faintest trace of rouge at the scene of the last attempt. But had the true culprit used Miss Rhodes as a pawn? Or was there another darker force at work? He shared his doubts with Captain Hastings one warm afternoon in the sitting-room, the air sweet with Mrs. Montfort's posies. Hastings, freshly returned from an errand, perched on the sofa and passed Poirot his tea. "You doubt her guilt?" Hastings asked, perplexed. "But she confessed, and we witnessed the joy when Eloise's song returned." Poirot set down his tiny cup. "Yes, Hastings, but consider. Who would plan 3 successive cylinder swaps, each more elaborate than the last, without knowing precisely how the decoys were arranged? Our second sleuthing left no tool marks. The 3rd theft was foiled by my deliberate design. Yet the thief penetrated our guard once more. Miss Rhodes may have replaced the cylinders unwittingly, but someone else must have orchestrated the sequence to lull us into complacency." Hastings frowned. "You suspect a mastermind behind the stolen melody?" Poirot closed his eyes and rubbed his fingertips together. "A subtle mind, one who observes our every move. Let us test our suspicions. I propose we stage another deterrent, something to confirm her innocence or expose the true culprit." He beckoned Hastings to follow. Within an hour, they had devised a plan. Tribunal to their approach was moderate. They would leave the original engraved cylinder intact once more, but they would install within the music box a concealed device, a tiny spring mechanism that, when turned, released a whisper of bell-like chime, inaudible to anyone who did not wind the key at exactly the proper moment. This hidden signature would betray the thief when, inevitably, the cylinder was removed again. Meanwhile, they would keep the genuine cylinder under lock and key, accessible only to Poirot himself. That night, Hastings stood guard in Eloise's nursery, propped against the cabinet's door, oblivious to the spring device nested inside the music box. Poirot took his post in the drawing-room, ear attuned to every footstep. Midnight chimed, then 1, then 2. At 2:30, a soft click drifted along the corridor. Hastings tensed, and Poirot advanced, candle tilted before him. Through the partially open door, Hastings glimpsed the intruder's silhouette advancing on the cabinet. He closed the door softly behind him, and aligning his body with the panels, watched as the figure winced at the candle's glow. The cloak dropped, revealing not Miss Rhodes, but Nurse Harriet, her powdered cheek faintly smudged with rouge, her face drawn but resolute. She removed the music box from its shelf, lifted the key, and wound it as though in trance. Hastings halted her with a gentle hand. "Nurse Harriet?" She trembled as though caught in a nightmare, Oh heavens, Captain, do not let me undo everything. She turned the key once more. Poirot, stepping forward from the shadows, held up a quizzical hand. Madame, once more your good intentions run astray. But why, after Miss Rhodes's confession, do we find you here? Nurse Harriet's shoulders sagged. She held the music box as though it weighed 100 weight. Monsieur Poirot, forgive me, but I could not bear that Eloise should learn of Miss Rhodes's scheme. I helped her replace the cylinder for her, believing that by sharing the burden I might protect her reputation. I thought if I substituted these blank cylinders before she came, the blame would fall on me, and that her music teaching might continue unridiculed. Poirot's eyes flickered with pity. So you, too, sought to shield Miss Rhodes from disgrace at Eloise's expense? He advanced and examined the barely audible spring mechanism Hastings had installed. And you returned the blank cylinder at exactly this hour, hoping none would notice my hidden chime signature. He wound the key gently. The bell-like whisper issued forth, confirming his trap. Nurse Harriet began to weep openly. I never meant Eloise any harm, monsieur. I supposed that if I bore the guilt, that poor Miss Rhodes, already so tormented, might be spared. Hastings set a comforting hand on her shoulder. Madam, you cannot protect her by stealing from the child. These acts, though conceived in kindness, have done great pain. Heartbroken, Nurse Harriet produced the third blank cylinder from her reticule and placed it on Hastings's palm. Make no mistake, this is the last I have. Poirot nodded, inclining his head. Then we must conclude this odyssey of kindness and secrecy. Tomorrow I shall arrange for a final restoration of the original cylinder, and I ask only that both you and Miss Rhodes assist Eloise in learning every note afresh, her own song, unchanged by well-intended hands. The following morning in the parlour, Miss Rhodes and Nurse Harriet knelt before Eloise, each guiding her small hand upon the crank, each gently reminding her of the opening notes, the rising arc, the lull that soothed the stars themselves. Eloise's face grew serene as her song returned, this time infused with gratitude for both rescuers. Mrs. Montfort watched with tears, her voice trembling as she joined in the refrain, blending mother's love with child's joy. By evening, the household resumed its ordinary rhythms under the gentle chords of La Berceuse de l'Étoile. Poirot and Hastings shared a quiet cup of chocolate in the drawing-room, the lamplight warm against the winter dusk. Hastings raised his cup. Another mystery resolved, though our two heroines were less villains than victims of compassion. Poirot sipped thoughtfully. Indeed, Hastings, this puzzle taught us that sometimes the heart's softest impulse may conceal the sharpest blade of error. But by laying all intentions bare, we restore not only melody to a child's dreams, but trust to human kindness. Outside, the frost glistened upon the window panes, and within, the music box's lullaby drifted through the corridors. No longer a stolen verse, but a reclaimed song of love, renewed by honesty and safeguarded by the little grey cells of a most particular detective. Chapter 4. The Secret in the Melody. A week after Nurse Harriet's tearful confession and Miss Rhodes's contrite revelations, Thornwood Manor seemed restored to a gentle repose. Eloise Montfort's nights were once again serenaded by La Berceuse de l'Étoile, and the parlour rang with laughter rather than whispers of stolen melodies. Yet for Hercule Poirot, peace was seldom complete. The events of recent nights had stirred deeper questions. Why had the thief selected that particular lullaby? What secret lay within its notes and words that compelled such devotion and such desperate acts to possess it? Late one afternoon, Poirot invited Mrs. Montfort, Captain Hastings, Nurse Harriet, and Miss Rhodes to the library. Sunlight slanted through leaded windows, illuminating shelves of leather-bound journals, musical manuscripts, and Francis Poulenc's scores. Mrs. Montfort placed Eloise's music box on the table, its cylinder restored and locked beneath glass. Poirot produced a small notebook. "Mes amis," he began gently, "we have learned much about human frailty, but I suspect the lullaby itself contains a hidden message." Nurse Harriet recalled that the tune originated from an old French manuscript among Madame's private collection. "I ask you, might we examine that manuscript and its context?" Mrs. Montfort's eyes widened. "My father, Eloise's grandfather, brought but one lullaby from Provence, hand-copied by an 1820s troubadour. It lies in a locked cabinet at the back of this room." She retrieved a heavy key from her chain and unlocked a tall oak cabinet. Inside, beneath genealogies and family letters, lay a slim folio of yellowed pages inscribed in neat copperplate. "Chanson et berceuse du midi." Poirot lifted the manuscript with reverence and opened to the lullaby's page. He traced the flowing French lines beneath the stave. Let us compare the original text with Miss Rhodes's composition and Eloise's engraving. Miss Rhodes leaned forward, her brow knitted. She produced the copyist's cylinder transcription she had drafted before Poirot's intervention. Poirot arranged side by side the manuscript's original notation, the engraved cylinder's pattern of grooves, and Miss Rhodes's transcription. "Note," he said, "that the lullaby's opening interval is a minor sixth, a dissonant leap unusual for a soothing melody. Yet, in the second bar, it shifts to a major third. A French trouvère might deliberately contrast these to convey longing and resolution. But here, the original manuscript includes a footnote in tiny red ink. Cherchez la sixième, puis l'allégresse. Seek the sixth, then the joy." That footnote was omitted from the engraved cylinder. Mrs. Montfort gasped. "I had never noticed the red ink. I gave the manuscript to the maid to rebind and display, unaware of the note." She tapped her finger on the cabinet's glass. "Who would have seen and copied it?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Our thief, perhaps, watching your every move, seizing that nuance to create an extra clue. But why embed a riddle in the lullaby? Observe that the red notation highlights two words, sixième and allégresse. If we take the sixth measure of the melody and shift it upward by a major third, might we uncover something hidden, perhaps a cipher directing us to another secret?" Hastings frowned and consulted his notebook. "The lullaby is 8 bars long. The 6th bar begins with a low A. Shifting up a major third gives us Siouk." Poirot nodded. "Siar in solfège is do dièse. But if we treat Siar as the third letter of do re mi, we get a directional hint, southeast, combined with 6th, perhaps southeast by 6 yards or 6 steps." He turned to Nurse Harriet. "Do you recall any spot in this library where 6 steps southeast of that cabinet lies concealed?" Harriet closed her eyes in concentration. "There is a reading desk down there, near the stained glass window. I always step 6 paces southeast from this cabinet to reach it." She took 2 steps, paused, and added 4 more. "Yes, 6 paces exactly, and I once noticed a loose floorboard under the carpet near that desk." Poirot's mouth curved with satisfaction. "Then we have our path. Let us ready ourselves." They gathered torches and removed the perspex display case. Poirot lifted the manuscript's page and placed it in his coat. As they moved through the stacks, even the portrait of Eloise seemed to watch them with hopeful eyes. At the reading desk, Hastings rolled back the Persian rug, revealing the worn floorboards. Poirot knelt and pressed a gloved fingertip on the 6th plank from the desk's southeast corner. With a soft click, the board tilted upward on a hidden hinge. Beneath lay a shallow recess containing a folded sheet of vellum and an ebony key. Poirot lifted the vellum. The candlelight revealed a single line in the same copperplate as the manuscript's red footnote. "Au jardin de la lune, sous le banc de pierre." In the moon garden, beneath the stone bench. Beneath it, someone had sketched a crude map of the house's rear grounds, where a circular garden and a solitary stone bench lay under the moonlit sky. He pocketed the note and, the key turning to the others. "Our lullaby's missing verse has become a map to another secret chamber, one in the moon garden. We must proceed at dusk, when the bench's shadow will reveal its hiding place." Miss Rhodes and Nurse Harriet exchanged stunned glances. Mrs. Montfort clasped her hands to her heart. Hastings grinned. "A secret in the melody. Who would have imagined?" Poirot held up the ebony key. "This key corresponds to the lock I found on Eloise's. Music box, an extra tumbler, custom made. We shall discover what it opens in the moon garden. But caution, our orchestrator watches still, cloaked in darkness and intent on concealment. We must be as stealthy as she." Through the afternoon and into golden dusk, the household busied itself with the ordinary: dinner preparations, music lessons, and final checks on Eloise's bedtime routine. But Poirot and Hastings, flanked by Mrs. Montfort and Nurse Harriet, slipped quietly into the rose-scented rear gardens as the silver moon ascended. There, beneath the circular hedge maze and trailing jasmine, lay the fabled moon garden. A ring of marble statues bathed in lunar glow, and at its centre, a weathered stone bench worn smooth by countless contemplations. Poirot studied the bench's base. The stone, though ancient, bore a faint seam along its north face. Hastings slid the ebony key into a concealed keyhole and turned it with a soft click. The bench's top shifted, revealing a moss-lined cavity beneath. Together they lifted the lid and discovered a small brass box, its lid engraved with a musical staff. Inside lay a final cylinder, smaller and more slender than the music boxes, with a series of minute grooves, and, rolled beside it, a folded scrap of vellum. Poirot, un rôle de note. La voix que tu chéris dort ici depuis centenaires. Fais chanter le souvenir pour libérer son esprit. The voice you cherish sleeps here for 100 years. Make memory sing to set her spirit free. Mrs. Montfort gasped. 100 years! But this music box belongs only to our family's past half-century." Poirot's eyes sparkled. "This refers, madame, not to Eloise's own melody, but to a much older song, one of your ancestors perhaps, whose lullaby became trapped in time." He held the slender cylinder before the moonlight and peered at its grooves. "This is the original master cylinder, from which your grandfather copied La Berceuse de l'Étoile. He must have discovered the ancient version and preserved it here, unwound and hidden so that its true owner might one day release it." Hastings whistled softly. "Then what remains is to wind this cylinder, play it on the music box, and set that century-old melody free." Poirot nodded. "Yes, but with care. We must ensure Eloise's box can accommodate this slender cylinder. Nurse Harriet, will you take the box and seal, and let us test it inside?" They returned to the nursery, cylinder in hand. Hastings fitted it into the rosewood case. Nurse Harriet wound the key, and Poirot, heart alight with anticipation, lifted the lid. The mechanism clicked, then sang forth a lullaby deeper and richer than any they had heard, its notes cascading like moonbeams, weaving through decades of silence. Eloise, drawn from slumber by the unfamiliar yet beautiful strains, opened her eyes as if greeting a long-lost friend. Mrs. Montfort knelt beside her, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Eloise, listen, this is your grandmother's lullaby, sung to you from across time." Eloise reached out to touch her mother's cheek. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Poirot stepped back and let the music fill the room, the ancient melody echoing softly around them. As the final notes faded, he closed the box gently. "Let this be our final discovery, that some songs are too precious even for theft, meant to lie dormant until the right moment summons them once more." Outside, the moon cast silver pathways over the rose garden, and the stone bench stood silent sentinel over centuries of memory. Within the house, Eloise slipped back into dreams, her spirit unburdened by loss. And in his study at Baker Street, Hercule Poirot would later add one more entry to his journal, an account of a puzzle in which a stolen lullaby revealed not only human frailty, but the abiding power of music to bridge generations and restore what time had nearly erased. Chapter 5. The legacy of the lost first dawn had scarcely broken when the gentle strains of Eloise's restored lullaby rippled through Mrs. Montfort's Kensington home, weaving their way down corridors and into the chambers of every astonished servant. Yet amid this apparent triumph, a deeper mystery stirred. The ancient cylinder recovered from the moonlit bench had played not one, but two distinct melodies. First, the tender Berceuse de l'Étoile, and then woven seamlessly into its final bars, a second, scarcely audible verse in an older tongue. As the household gathered for breakfast, Nurse Harriet's eyes were bright with wonder and unease. Captain Hastings and Miss Rhodes exchanged perplexed glances, and Poirot, his little grey cells already ablaze, tapped his teacup thoughtfully. "Miss Chaise, Amos," he said, rising from his seat at the head of the long dining table. "Our ancient cylinder has yielded a secret beyond the recovery of a single melody. Listen closely. At the close of the second verse, there lies a choral flourish, 9 notes descending in a minor key, then a final solitary major chord. In Provençal folk tradition, such a cadence often signals an acrostic or code." He paused. as Hastings peered at the music box in its ornate display case. Indeed, the cylinder's final inscription, tiny though it be, bears a sequence of stamped letters, VERITAS, the Latin for truth. Mrs. Montfort drew in her breath. Truth. But what truth? My daughter's lullaby? My grandfather's legacy? Poirot turned to the assembled gathered. Let us consider context. The original Provençal manuscript included a marginal note by the troubadour. La vérité dort sous la rose qui veille. Truth sleeps beneath the rose that watches. Thus, our 9-note flourish may be a key telling us where deeper secrets lie. Beneath a rose, perhaps a certain bloom in your rose garden. Miss Rhodes rose, excitement lighting her face. The rose garden by the pavilion, where we planted that white rose for the festival of remembrance. Hastings rose with equal alacrity. Let us not tarry, monsieur. If the truth sleeps beneath that rose, perhaps we shall unearth yet another marvel. They hurried through the hall and out to the walled backyard garden, where the single white rose, planted by lantern light under Poirot's direction, stood in full bloom. Dew sparkled on its petals like scattered diamonds at dawn. Poirot knelt beside the bloom, brushing aside a few petals. Beneath lay a small iron ring embedded in the soil. He lifted it, revealing a shallow cavity containing a leather-bound journal, its cover stamped with the Montfort family crest, a silver star entwined with thorned vines. Mrs. Montfort's hand flew to her mouth. My grandmother's diary! Poirot handed it to her reverently. This must be her own chronicle, locked away until this moment by those 9 notes of truth. But why hide it here? Mrs. Montfort opened the diary with trembling fingers, revealing elegant handwriting in French. She cleared her throat and began to read an entry, dated 1842. To my dearest descendants, should you ever restore my beloved Berceuse de l'Étoile, know that the final verse, lost to time, carries the confession of a secret long born, that our family's fortunes were built upon kindness and guilt alike. May you find the strength to bear both. A hush fell. Poirot glanced at Hastings. A confession? But of what? They returned to the morning room, the diary cradled between Poirot and Mrs. Montfort as a precious relic. There, at a small writing desk, Poirot flipped through its brittle pages until he found the final verse, penned in a shaky hand. When the moon and star align, seek the tears that never dry. Beneath the cradle's silent song lies the truth we held too long. Miss Rhodes's brow furrowed. Tears that never dry. The tears of Nefertiti in the gallery. Hastings leapt to his feet. And the cradle, Eloise's nursery. Beneath her cradle must lie the truth. They crossed once again into Eloise's room, where the child's brass bedstead gleamed in the morning light. Beneath the mattress they found, just as the diary instructed, a hidden compartment built into the frame. Inside lay a small velvet pouch containing a single silver locket. Opening it, Mrs. Montfort revealed a faded miniature portrait of a young governess, her own mother, as a girl, together with a folded note in French. My dear Adelaide, forgive the means by which I secured your comfort. I sold one of my own lullabies, composed for your slumber, to a distant merchant of Brussels, so that you might never know hunger. Let this locket remind you of love's sacrifice and truth's embrace. Mrs. Montfort's voice trembled as she translated. My grandmother sold her own composition, her private lullaby, in return for coins, so that my father might be educated and feed his family. Poirot closed the locket gently. A noble sacrifice, yet one cloaked in secrecy. The silent tears that never dry were those of the governess, weeping for her lost melody. Nurse Harriet laid a comforting hand on Mrs. Montfort's arm. She preserved her granddaughter's sleep at the cost of her own song. Poirot surveyed the room, his mind swift and clear. Hence the 9-note code guided us here, and the rediscovery of the locket and diary reveals that La Berceuse de l'Étoile carried not only comfort, but a legacy of love and sacrifice. Your family's truth lay hidden beneath the rose and the cradle, awaiting those who knew to listen for that final verse. Miss Rhodes stepped forward. Then I, too, must sing my lullaby for Eloise, not in place of hers, but in homage to the governess's sacrifice. Hastings grinned, eyes moist. A duet of past and present, honouring both melodies. That night, Eloise fell asleep to 2 lullabies, the familiar Berceuse de l'Étoile and Miss Rhodes's tender composition, a harmony of love that spanned generations. Mrs. Montfort closed her eyes with a grateful heart. Nurse Harriet wept gentle tears, and even the portraits in the gallery seemed to glow with recognition of truth, at last laid bare. Back in his Baker Street flat, Poirot made his final journal entry. Thornwood's stolen lullaby unveiled a treasure not of gold, but of generational love and selfless sacrifice. Music carries truth woven in melody. When one hears not only the notes, but the story they conceal, justice is served in its gentlest form. And so, in the cradle of a child's sleep, the truth may finally rest, sung aloud by every heart that dared to listen. He closed the parcel, sipped the last of his chocolate, and allowed himself a contented smile. Outside, the London streets lay hushed beneath the moon, the city's own lullaby whispering of mysteries solved and melodies restored. Chapter 6. The Shadow over the Locket. The warmth of spring sunlight had returned to Mrs. Montfort's Kensington home, bringing with it the delicate fragrance of hyacinths that lined the pathways to the rose garden. For 6 nights in a row, Eloise drifted to sleep under the twin lullabies, her grandmother's recovered Berceuse de l'Étoile, and Miss Rhodes's own tender composition, while Nurse Harriet watched over her with a gentle smile. Yet on the 7th dawn, a new alarm shattered the peace. The silver locket containing the miniature portrait of the governess and the confession note lay missing from its velvet cushion in Eloise's nursery. Mrs. Montfort, still wrapped in her lace mourning shawl, stood at the threshold of the nursery with terror in her eyes. She shook her head, as though to clear away a nightmare. "It was here last night," she whispered. "I placed it beside my daughter's crib before I retired." Nurse Harriet, pale as chalk, began to tremble. I saw the locket when I checked on Eloise at midnight," she admitted. "It was shining beside her on the pillow. But by morning, gone." Captain Hastings, summoned post-haste, arrived in his customary tweed and cap, his expression a mixture of concern and guilt. "I ought to have kept watch last night," he confessed to Poirot, who stood in the nursery doorway, his little grey cells already piecing together the puzzle. Poe-like, The drawing-room's grandfather clock ticked on unheedingly. Hastings knelt by the empty cushion, inspecting faint impressions in the silk. No tool marks, monsieur, only the slight crease where the locket must have rested. Poirot swept into the nursery on quick, precise steps. His aquamarine gaze fell upon the small cabinet beside the bed, then upon the high window, its latch unlatched. He tapped his cane thoughtfully. "Madame, you keep the music box and the locket in separate locations. The music box draws seekers for its melody. This locket is sought for its revelation of your grandmother's secret sacrifice. Who benefits by possessing such an heirloom?" Mrs. Montfort's eyes brimmed with tears. "My cousin, Victor Lamont. He left our family years ago, estranged over matters of inheritance. He learned of the governess's sacrifice and might use the locket to blackmail me. He wrote to me recently, claiming the locket was rightfully his." She swallowed hard. "I dismissed his letter as folly." Poirot nodded, turning to Hastings. "We must consider Cousin Victor as principal suspect. Gather his letters. Hastings, will you fetch them from Madame's desk?" Hastings hurried off, returning with a stack of correspondence sealed with an ornate crest. Poirot laid them before Mrs. Montfort and scanned the most recent missive. With its yellowed ink and trembling script, it threatened scandal unless the locket was surrendered, an all-too-familiar tactic of extortion. Yet Poirot's gaze lingered on that final letter's envelope, its perforations strangely neat, as though opened not by tear, but by precise cut. He produced a slender knife from his pocket and examined the envelope's edge under the lamplight. "See here, the cut is too straight for a casual opening. Only someone possessing sharp tools and calm hands could remove and replace that letter undetected." He looked at Nurse Harriet. "And you handled the letters, madam?" Nurse Harriet closed her eyes, a shudder overtaking her. "Yes, monsieur. I sorted the morning post at dawn." "Yet you did not notice the envelope, resealed with fresh glue?" Poirot pressed. Nurse shook her head. "I did not." Poirot turned to Miss Rhodes, who stood with clasped hands in the corner. "And you, mademoiselle, did you deliver any messages for Mrs. Montfort?" Miss Rhodes's cheeks flushed pink. "Only that I offered to read aloud from the letters, to comfort her." Her voice wavered as Hastings caught Poirot's eye. Both detected a glimmer of withheld truth. Poirot took a measured breath. "Let us examine your dancing slipper, Miss Rhodes." He asked her to remove one. Upon the sole he found a tiny red smudge, identical in hue to the powder they had traced in earlier thefts. Miss Rhodes stared in mortification. I slipped while carrying the post to my room last night. I sat to read, and the locket's letter tumbled from my bosom. I returned it unnoticed." She burst into tears. "I never took the locket. I only handled the envelope. But I did not see the locket itself." "That explains the envelope," Hastings said. "Our thief could have used Miss Rhodes's letter as cover, then swapped the letter and stolen the locket moments later." Poirot nodded gravely. "Yes, but who had both a sharp edge for opening and the familiarity with furniture to hide the locket swiftly? I suspect the safer in the drawing-room, the very one we overlooked." He turned to Mrs. Montfort. "Your butler, Mr. Harper, oversaw this room's keys. He possesses a master skeleton key, and he handles the silver locket each morning when he dusts Eloise's dresser." At Poirot's words, Mr. Giles Harper, summoned to the nursery, emerged from the corridor in his immaculate livery. His expression was one of measured calm, his gloved hands folded before him. Poirot advanced, voice soft yet unyielding. "Mr. Harper, last night, after Nurse Harriet returned to her quarters, you entered the nursery under the pretext of tidying. The furniture. The locket was within reach of your practised hand. You opened your letters, resealed them neatly, then pocketed the locket." Harper's composure fractured. He released a strangled sigh and bowed his head. "Madam, forgive me. I acted out of bitterness. Your father never recognized my service, and when you married into wealth, I felt forgotten. When I learned of the locket's value, its sentimental and financial worth, I sought to reclaim what I believed my due." He exhaled. "I never meant harm to Eloise. She means no more to me than my own nieces. I shall return the locket this instant and offer my resignation." Mrs. Montfort's eyes filled with sorrow. "Giles, you have served us faithfully for years. Why resort to such depths?" He looked up, tears in his eyes. "Pride, madame, and anger that you forgot how I trained your mother's silver, and cared for her cradle when you were not yet born." He extended the locket with a shaking hand. "Take it. Keep it safe." Poirot stepped forward and took the locket. "Let this be the final chapter in our stolen verse. Your sorrow need not break your pride, Mr. Harper. Accept that. Honesty restores both dignity and trust." Harper nodded, relief and shame mingling on his face. With the locket returned to its velvet cushion and the servant's skeleton key secured, the Montfort household breathed once more in freedom. Nurse Harriet wept at the bedside, Eloise smiled in dawning innocence, and Miss Rhodes gently laid a reassuring hand on Mrs. Montfort's shoulder. That evening, Poirot and Hastings shared a quiet supper in the kitchen's hidden alcove. Hastings poured himself a mug of ale. "You know, Hercule, I never suspected Harper of envy so deep. It just goes to show that every heart may shelter unspoken despair." Poirot nodded, lifting his spoon to his lips. "Yes, Hastings, the puzzle of the stolen lullaby revealed not only melodies, but the fragile human strings that bind pride, service, and sacrifice. In the end, truth sings sweetest when set free." He paused, savouring the ale. "And now, mon ami, shall we return to Baker Street? I hear my chocolate awaits me." Outside, the late spring dusk settled upon the townhouse, and within, the lullaby's gentle refrain wove through corridors, a testament to a family's trials, and to the grace that follows when the deepest truths at last emerge from the shadows. Chapter 7. A lullaby's last coda spring's full breath stirred the hyacinths in Mrs. Montfort's garden, their lilac heads nodding under a sky as clear as polished glass. Inside the Kensington townhouse, the parlours and corridors gleamed with fresh polish. The nursery was redressed in crisp linens, and Eloise Montfort's cheerful laughter drifted like music through the air. 6 chapters of secrets had led to the safe restoration of her grandmother's lullaby, the recovery of a hidden diary, and the return of a stolen locket. Yet, as the household prepared for the annual garden fete, Hercule Poirot sensed that one final movement was required to close this chapter of melody and memory, in which every heart, once severed by secrecy, would find its last coda of peace. On the morning of the fête, Mrs. Montfort stood in the sunlit drawing-room with a porcelain teacup in hand, gazing at the portrait of her grandmother that hung above the mantel. Nurse Harriet arranged fresh rose petals along the piano bench in the nursery, and Miss Rhodes tuned the pianoforte strings to perfection, humming fragments of both lullabies. Even Mr. Giles Harper, restored to his butler's post with Mrs. Montfort's forgiveness, moved with respectful deference, placing silver trays of petit four on lace-covered tables. Hastings arrived to assist with arrangements, carrying ribbons for the rose arbours, and found Poirot in the library, examining the Provençal manuscript's final footnote one last time. "Mon ami," Hastings began, "the fête begins in an hour, yet you seem pensive. Have we missed any loose ends?" Poirot's aquamarine eyes shone with quiet satisfaction. "Hastings, every thread has been woven. But I believe true resolution lies not in static recovery, but in the living harmony of this family united." He closed the manuscript gently. "We have seen how a stolen melody and hidden diary awakened memories and spurred confessions. Now, we must ensure that the spirit behind those secrets, the governess's love, Mrs. Montfort's inheritance, Eloise's sleep, continues to thrive beyond mere objects. Let us orchestrate a final gesture that sings the lullaby's purpose aloud." Hastings raised an eyebrow. A final gesture? But what could match the recovery of two lullabies, a diary, a locket, and the confession of a resentful butler? Poirot smiled, fingertips steepled. Music, not the lullaby for one child, but a song for all who dwell here. We shall commission Miss Rhodes to lead a chorus of childhood voices in the garden, a simple concert of La Berceuse de l'Étoile, accompanied by the pianoforte, and including the poem's final verse in ancient Provençal, so that memory and culture pass from generation to generation. Hastings's face brightened. "By Jove, that is splendid! A public celebration of the lullaby's true legacy, one that transforms a private solace into a shared heritage." Poirot nodded. "Precisely. And within that sharing lies the ultimate triumph over theft and secrecy." By midday, the garden was a riot of pastel banners and white roses twined with silken ribbons. Tables groaned under platters of petit fours, finger sandwiches, and iced lemonade. Villagers from the square crowded through the gates, curious to glimpse the household's treasures and partake in the festivities. Sir Reginald Thornwood's silver-plated music box, now declared an heirloom of singular provenance, stood on a pedestal beneath the rose arbour, its cylinder safely ensconced behind a glass panel. The Provençal manuscript and Mrs. Montfort's grandmother's diary had been transcribed into a bound volume on display in the library, as a testament to the home's restored transparency, and in a far corner a temporary stage bore the grand pianoforte, tuned to concert pitch by Miss Rhodes herself. Poirot moved among guests with graceful formality, accepting bows of gratitude from grateful villagers and offering approving nods to the local schoolmaster who had brought a troop of children to sing. Hastings hovered nearby, adjusting the sheet music stands and encouraging the nervous young choristers. Eloise, radiant in a simple white frock, perched on the edge of the stage, clutching her rag doll as she watched her mother take her seat in the front row. As the clock struck 3, Poirot ascended the steps. He tapped a silver bell, its clear tone carrying across the crowd. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice rich and measured. Thank you for joining us today to celebrate not only the bloom of our roses, but the bloom of memory and truth at the heart of this home. Today's performance is not merely a recital, but a tribute to the governess whose lullaby we restored, to the sacrifices of Mrs. Montfort's grandmother, and to the devotion that guided Nurse Harriet, Miss Rhodes, and even Mr. Harper through acts of kindness and at times misguided protectiveness. He paused, letting silence underscore his words. Now, please rise and join us in song. At his cue, Miss Rhodes took her place at the pianoforte. The children shuffled into position, notes trembling on their lips. Eloise, summoned by Nurse Harriet, joined the line, standing at the front with a determined smile. The villagers, a ragtag chorus of shopkeepers, schoolchildren, and local gentry, rose from folding chairs, perched along whitewashed benches. The first strains of the lullaby floated across the garden, tender as the hush before dawn. Children's voices, pure and bright, sang the old Provençal words. First the French verses, then the whispered second verse in the local tongue, learned by heart under Miss Rhodes's patient guidance. At the 9-note flourish, they held the descending minor motif, then resolved into the final major chord. As one voice rang out, "Veritas!" the crowd joined in the final refrain, clapping softly as the last note faded into the spring air. A hush fell once more before a wave of applause rolled across the garden. Mrs. Montfort wiped tears from her eyes as the children took their bows. Nurse Harriet embraced Eloise. Miss Rhodes curtsied with radiant pride. Mr. Harper, dabbing at his eyes, bowed his head in respectful acknowledgment, and Hastings and Poirot exchanged triumphant smiles. Later, as the sun began its gentle descent, the villagers departed with parcels of sweetmeats and trimmed rose stems, their pockets bulging with memories of a day where private lullaby became communal anthem. The children lingered to press flowers into pages of the diary on display in the library. Mrs. Montfort distributed printed copies of the Provençal verses to local schoolchildren, ensuring the lullaby's final verse would never again be lost and would travel far beyond Kensington's borders. In the quiet that followed, Poirot and Hastings strolled through the now empty rose garden, the petals fallen like pastel snow beneath their feet. Hastings sighed contentedly. "Hercule, I dare say that this is the sweetest case of all, one solved not by exposing a murderer, but by restoring song and trust." Poirot inhaled the rose-scented air. "Yes, Hastings. In the end, the greatest mystery was not who stole a melody, but how love, sometimes misguided, can transform solace into secrecy, and how truth, once sung freely, becomes our finest inheritance." He paused beside the rose planted in Chapter 6, now a sturdy bush clothed in pure white blossoms. Inviting Hastings to stand with him, they watched as a single child, a daughter of the local baker, gentle in her approach, bent to gather a fallen petal, her small hand cupped as if holding a treasure. "See how the next generation claims these petals," Poirot murmured. "The lullaby's guardianship now belongs to them, and to every child who will learn this song as their own. In music as in memory, we find that our darkest secrets yield to dawn's warm light." Hastings nodded. "To dawn's last coda, then, and to the lullaby that sings on in every heart." Poirot pressed his hat over his brow. let us return to Baker Street, mon ami, before the roses close for the night. But take heart. Here, in this quiet corner of London, we have tuned the discordant notes of human frailty to a melody of truth and reconciliation. As they passed beneath the rose arbour, the petals whispered in the evening breeze, as though offering a final benediction, a lullaby for the ages, now safe in every child's song. Chapter 8. The Song Beyond the Garden Gate, the morning after. The fate brought a hush to Mrs. Montfort's household, as gentle sunlight filtered through alabaster curtains, promising warmth yet again. The rose garden, once thronged with singing children and proud villagers, now lay dew-kissed and still, its petals drifting in silent testimony to yesterday's triumph. Inside the house, the echoes of La Berceuse de l'Étoile had faded into memory, but its spirit lingered in every corner. In the tidy parlour, where Nurse Harriet placed fresh hyacinths, in the library, where Mrs. Montfort arranged the Provençal manuscript alongside the governess's diary, and even in the nursery, where Eloise Montfort's music box stood gleaming behind its protective glass. Yet for Hercule Poirot, revisiting the scene of resolved mysteries was never sufficient. His little grey cells had already turned toward one final, unexpected harmony. Poirot arrived at Mrs. Montfort's front door just after breakfast, his polished boots echoing on the gravel drive. Hastings joined him, carrying an embroidered handkerchief and a small parcel. Inside the parcel lay a neatly folded letter, addressed in a precise but unfamiliar hand, to the guardians of La Berceuse de l'Étoile. Poirot's brows rose in curiosity as he crossed the threshold. In the drawing-room, Miss Rhodes sat by the window, cradling a cup of tea. Mr. Harper polished silver at the sideboard. Nurse Harriet arranged a dainty vase of violets, and Mrs. Montfort, clad in a soft spring frock, stood before the mantel, watching the roses bloom outside. Eloise, in a white pinafore, played contentedly with her rag dolls on the Persian rug. The atmosphere was tranquil. Too tranquil, thought Poirot. "Mes amis," he said, producing the letter, "I apologize for another intrusion into your lives. Yet this morning I received this correspondence, slipped beneath my door in London. Its sender claims knowledge of both lullabies and hints at a final verse, one that has eluded even our ancient Provençal cylinder. I propose we read it together and see if another chapter awaits." He broke the wafer seal and unfolded the paper. As the group leaned forward, Mrs. Montfort's voice trembled. "To those who have sung the lullaby, beneath 3 petals rests the heart of the tune. Seek not the rose by day, but where the moon's tender gaze confirms the hidden voice." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the room. Hastings exchanged a look with Poirot. "3 petals," echoed Nurse Harriet. "Where could one find such a rose?" Mrs. Montfort's eyes misted. "The 3-petalled rose. My grandmother once mentioned a rare cultivar she discovered in Provence, called Rosa trifolia. She cultivated one seed here as a cutting, hidden away lest its secret be lost." She crossed the room to a small greenhouse beyond French doors. It was transplanted to protect it from frost. They followed Mrs. Montfort through the wide windows into a narrow glass house, whose panes gleamed with condensation. Inside, trailing, vines of emerald leaves climbed lattices, and in the centre stood a single rose bush, bearing a solitary bloom of faint blush, each flower with exactly 3 large petals, an anomaly that marked it as Rosa Trifolia. As the group gathered around, the petals quivered in the soft breeze drawn through open vents. Poirot studied the bloom, steepling his fingers. The letter instructs us to seek not by day, but where the moon confirms the hidden voice. I suggest we await dusk, and then return here to discover the heart of the tune buried beneath the petals. The afternoon, preparations unfolded almost as ceremonially as before. Hastings laid a circle of lanterns around the greenhouse's exterior. Nurse Harriet brushed away detritus from the rosebush's base. Miss Rhodes cleaned the glass panes to ensure the moonlight entered unimpeded. As evening drew close, Mrs. Montfort fetched a small trowel and 2 buckets, one for soil, one for water, hoping to assist in the impending excavation. At the hour of the second moonrise, faint and golden, Poirot, Hastings, Nurse Harriet, Miss Rhodes, and Mrs. Montfort assembled under the greenhouse's arched doorway. Eloise, too, excited to sleep, watched from within, seated on a cushioned bench with Mr. Harper standing dutifully by her side. The lanterns cast soft halos around each figure, and the moon poured silver through the glass, illuminating the 3-petalled rose with uncanny clarity. Poirot stepped forward, bowing to the assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen, let us heed the verses. Command. Beneath 3 petals rests the heart of the tune." He instructed Mrs. Montfort to lean over the bloom and gently lift one of its petals. Underneath, the silvery underside of the petal glowed in moonlight. Hastings, with gloved hands, drew aside the leaf litter and loosened the soil with the trowel. As they dug a few inches beneath the bush, Nurse Harriet's hand struck a small wooden box, roughly the size of a music cylinder. Poirot took it carefully from the earth and brushed away the soil. The box's lid was carved with the rose of Trifolia and bore a single tuning fork engraved upon the top. Poirot placed the box on a glass table inside the greenhouse and pried the lid open. Inside lay a slender transparent cylinder, composed not of metal but of a crystal-like substance, both sturdy and delicate. Poirot lifted it, showing how the moonlight refracted through the facets, casting tiny prisms of light like dancing stars on the glass walls. Within its crystalline form lay a spiral groove, almost invisible to the naked eye, but etched deep enough to carry melody when properly handled. "Behold," Poirot declared, "the heart of the tune, an original master cylinder composed in crystal, not metal. It was hidden beneath the trifoliate rose, so that only those who knew the ancient verse might find it." He turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, might you wind this upon our music box, and witness what sound it yields?" Hastings nodded and retrieved Eloise's rosewood box from Mrs. Montfort's arms. He fitted the crystal cylinder into the box's interior chamber. As the key turned, the mechanism clicked hesitantly, crystal upon brass, and then an ethereal melody emerged, the original Provençal lullaby, richer and more haunting than any registered on metal, and then, at its close, a whispered third verse, sung in softly accented Provençal, so fragile the words seemed like moonlight itself. "Under moonlit veil, the heart shall sing. A trinity of petals, a single ring. The song reborn from crystals. Gleam keeps love alive in every dream. Eloise gasped and covered her mouth in wonder. Nurse Harriet dabbed tears from her eyes as Miss Rhodes's lips trembled in awe. Mrs. Montfort covered her heart, overcome by emotion. Even Mr. Harper, stoic as ever, bowed his head. Poirot allowed the final notes to fade completely before speaking. This, mes amis, is the crux of our lullaby's legacy. A third verse lost to time, hidden in crystal beneath a rare bloom, waiting for those who value truth and lineage. Mrs. Montfort approached the rosebush, caressing its petals. My grandmother must have composed this crystal cylinder as her final gift, ensuring that her lullaby would live on not only in memory but in magic. Miss Rhodes stepped forward, voice soft. And now the full lullaby can be taught to every child who deserves its comfort in 3 verses: metal, fabric, and crystal, symbols of past, present, and future. Hastings retrieved a lantern from the stand. I suggest we take this cylinder to the library and place it alongside the Provençal manuscript and the governess's diary, completing the set. Poirot nodded. Indeed. Let every visitor know that some melodies require more than ears. They demand courage, insight, and a willingness to seek truth beneath petals and shadows. They carried the crystal cylinder back through the garden under the watching gaze of the moon. Eloise, cradling the rosewood box, hummed the lullaby's new 3rd verse with precocious clarity. In the library, they placed the cylinder in a glass vitrine beside the leather-bound volume of songs and the little silver locket. Poirot affixed a small placard that read, "Here lies the crystal verse, discovered beneath the Rosa Trifolia by the light of the moon. May its fragile song bind hearts in truth and dream." After the cylinder's enshrinement, the household gathered one last time in the drawing-room. Eloise danced upon a footstool to the melody, her silver curls bouncing in time. Nurse Harriet watched with maternal pride. Miss Rhodes, pencil behind her ear, jotted down the 3rd verse's notation. Mrs. Montfort embraced her daughter. The weight of centuries lifted in one crystalline note, and even Mr. Harper, eyes shining, offered a small bow. Hastings and Poirot retired to the hearth, contented as the evening shadows lengthened. A final cup of chocolate warmed Poirot's hands as he reflected on the extraordinary journey. A stolen melody, a hidden diary, a locket of confession, a trifoliate rose, and now the revelation of a 3rd verse in crystal. He raised his cup to Hastings. "Mon cher, this chapter draws to a close. Yet in every lullaby lies an open door to wonder. We have sung the 1st and 2nd verses. The 3rd terrifies as it enchants." Hastings chuckled. "Only you could speak of terror in a lullaby, Hercule, but you are right. What a splendid finale." Poirot tapped his temple. "We must never forget that even the gentlest of tunes may guard the greatest of secrets. But now, mon ami, let us allow all hearts to rest, Eloise's included, safe in the knowledge that truth, once found, resonates in every dream." Outside, the garden gate swung softly in its hinges, and the moon turned its face away, leaving Thornwood Manor to sleep under a blanket of rose petals, hyacinths, and the crystal echo of a lullaby that would cradle generations yet unborn. Chapter 9. The Melodies Carried On. The morning after the moonlit revelation of the crystal verse dawned. with a hush of reverence at Mrs. Montfort's Kensington home. Across the rose garden and through open windows, a single tendril of La Berceuse de l'Étoile drifted through the parlour as Héloïse Montfort practised the third verse, her small voice ringing clear and unwavering. Within the house, no trace remained of the upheavals that had twice stolen her grandmother's lullaby, nor of the diary and locket that had laid bare long-hidden family truths. Yet everywhere one looked, from the newly inscribed placard beside the crystal cylinder to the framed manuscript in the library, the message was plain. Some melodies outlast the passing of generations, carrying both joy and truth to every listening heart. In the drawing-room, where an afternoon tea had been arranged in honour of the household's healing, Mrs. Montfort presided with calm dignity. Nurse Harriet, renewed in spirit, poured fragrant Darjeeling. Miss Rhodes served her own shortbread with embarrassed pride. And even Giles Harper, his skirts respectfully dusted as he carried the silver tray, allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Captain Hastings and Hercule Poirot arrived together, the latter in his customary black morning coat, the former in his neatly pressed tweeds, their expressions reflecting equal measures of contentment and lingering curiosity. As they gathered, Mrs. Montfort raised her teacup in a gentle toast. To every hand that helped restore melody to our daughter's sleep, from the found diary to nurse's steadfast watch, to Miss Rhodes's patient lessons, and to Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings, whose little grey cells have guided us through every turn. May this melody now be ours to share forever. A murmur of assent rippled through the company, punctuated by the soft clink of porcelain and the faintest echo of a child's hum drifting from the open nursery door. Héloïse, perched on a low stool beside her governess, let her soft soprano carry the lullaby's opening notes into the room. Nurse Harriet's eyes brimmed with tears. Miss Rhodes bowed her head in devotion to the music, and even Giles Harper's measured features softened, as though the notes of Mrs. Montfort's grandmother's song had at last soothed the last ache of an old wound. When the last crumb of shortbread had disappeared, and the teacups lay empty, Poirot rose. "Mes amis," he said, voice calm yet carrying, "though our case of the stolen lullaby began as a matter of missing grooves, it has grown into a testament of truth uncovered and lessons learned. But every melody, once shared, demands an audience, eager to carry it forward. I propose that we make La Berceuse de l'Étoile and its third verse a gift to the wider world, a living legacy beyond these walls." Mrs. Montfort's eyes shone. "A public concert, do you mean? To share the lullaby in its entirety?" "Precisely," Poirot replied. "Not only here in Kensington, but at the local town hall, with the choir of village children who once joined our garden chorus. We shall send invitations far and wide and ensure that this lullaby, bearing the voices of governess and granddaughter, of crystal and metal, finds a place in every home that seeks comfort in its strains." Miss Rhodes stepped forward enthusiastically. "I would be honoured to organise such a concert. Perhaps we might even record the third verse, so that no child anywhere need fear its loss again." Hastings chuckled. Between the magic of crystal cylinders and the marvel of modern gramophones, the future of lullabies is assured. And so, in the weeks that followed, the Montfort household transformed once more, this time for celebration rather than mystery. Invitations were printed bearing the rose and star emblem, announcing an evening of the lullaby, 3 verses, 3 centuries. Local newspapers carried gentle announcements. Come hear the Provençal lullaby restored in full for the first time since the 19th century. The town hall's parquet floor gleamed under fresh polish. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, and the stage was graced by a grand pianoforte, accompanied by a small brass music box fitted with both metal and crystal cylinders. The evening of the concert arrived with an autumnal chill in the air. A crowd of villagers, dignitaries, and curious Londoners filled the hall, murmuring in anticipation as soft lantern light gleamed on polished wood. On stage, Miss Rhodes took her place at the pianoforte. Beside her, Nurse Harriet cradled the rosewood music box, while Eloise stood, clutching her rag doll, her white frock illuminated by a single beam of stage light. Mrs. Montfort, Captain Hastings, and Hercule Poirot sat in the front row, hands folded in expectancy, their reflections visible behind the grand window panes. Poirot rose again to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you will hear a lullaby woven through 3 centuries, a song of comfort and revelation, of sacrifice and truth. Its first verse is carried upon copper-engraved metal, its second awakening in Provençal folk song, and its third discovered in crystal beneath a rose that blooms but once in a lifetime. I ask you to listen with open hearts. With a nod, Miss Rhodes struck the pianoforte's opening chord. Eloise wound the music box's key, and the first verse, the gentle, familiar melody, filled the hall. Then, at the cue of the 9-note, flourish, the metal cylinder gave way to the softer second verse, sung by Eloise with pure clarity. Finally, as the hush deepened, Nurse Harriet eased the crystal cylinder into place. The box's mechanism whispered, and the ancient third verse rose like moonlight over water. The audience fell utterly silent, rapt by the crystal timbre that seemed to suspend time itself. When the final chord faded, a single moment of quiet reigned. Then the hall erupted in applause, so thunderous the glass chandeliers trembled. Tears glistened on many faces, hands clapped, voices cheered. Eloise beamed. Eloise shyly curtsied. Miss Rhodes bowed deeply, and Nurse Harriet dabbed at her cheeks with a handkerchief. Mrs. Montfort and Hastings leapt to their feet, and Poirot smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a composer who has found perfect harmony at last. In the days that followed, recordings of the 3-verse lullaby were sent to libraries, schools, and orphanages across the country. Local choirs adopted the melody, and Mrs. Montfort's home became a small pilgrimage, site for music lovers and historians eager to witness the cradle that had once held so many secrets. The Provençal manuscript, the governess's diary, the silver locket, the metal and crystal cylinders, all were enshrined in a custom-built display cabinet in the local museum, labelled simply La Berceuse de l'Étoile, a lullaby's journey. Through time. In his study at Baker Street, Poirot penned the final words of the case file. Thus concludes the affair of the stolen lullaby, a tapestry woven of melody, mystery, and memory that spanned centuries and crossed the thresholds of private sorrow and communal joy. In each note we found truth. In each verse a legacy of love. May every child who sleeps to this song and every guardian who keeps it secret, be mindful that some tunes are too precious to vanish, and that kindness, though sometimes misdirected, can guide us to our finest revelations. He signed with a flourish, H. Poirot, Baker Street, 16th of October, 18th. Closing the ledger, he poured himself a final cup of dark chocolate, his eyes alight with indulgent pride. Outside, the London streets wound ever onward. But within, the echoes of 3 lullabies lingered, proof that, in the end, a single melody could bind hearts, uncover secrets, and bridge the solitary chords of solitude with the shared symphony of human compassion. Chapter 10. The Last Note. The morning sun glinted through the tall sash windows of Mrs. Montfort's drawing-room, gilding the polished oak floors and illuminating every carefully arranged vase of spring flowers. An electric sense of expectancy thrummed through the Kensington townhouse as servants flitted silently about, ensuring that every teacup was spotless and every cushion plump. Today was the final gathering of those who had borne witness to the extraordinary journey of a single lullaby, a melody lost and found, transcribed in metal and crystal, and carried across generations by love, sacrifice, and the indomitable little grey cells of Hercule Poirot. Héloïse Montfort, dressed in a simple frock of pale blue, sat perched upon a footstool beside her mother, her small hands folded demurely in her lap. Beside them, Nurse Harriet arranged the last of the photographs in silver frames. The Provençal manuscript opened to the page of the 3rd verse. The governess's locket on its velvet cushion, the metal cylinder in its glass case, and the crystal cylinder beside the trifoliate rose. Beyond the French doors, the rose garden lay still in morning dew, an unspoken testament to all that had transpired beneath its blossoms. Captain Hastings arrived first, tipping his hat to Poirot, who stood by the fireplace, pince-nez in place, surveying the scene with that inscrutable mix of pride and satisfaction. Next came Miss Emmeline Rhodes, carrying her notebook filled with final transcriptions of the lullaby's 3 verses, her eyes bright with purpose. Mr. Giles Harper, reinstated to his butler's place by Mrs. Montfort's grace, walked quietly behind, carrying the bound volume of Mrs. Montfort's grandmother's diary. Finally, Mrs. Montfort herself entered, her face radiant but touched with wistful gravity at the thought of bidding farewell to this chapter of her family's history. Poirot cleared his throat gently. "Mes amis," he began, his precise tones filling the room with calm authority, "we are assembled once more, not to recover a missing note, or unravel a concealed cipher, but to give formal closure to a tale that has sung itself into the hearts of all who heard it. Today we shall commit to record not only the melodies themselves, but the spirit by which they endured." He gestured to the rosewood music box on a small table before the hearth. This box has sheltered 2 cylinders, metal and crystal, and borne witness to secrets lost and found. I propose that we place within it one final cylinder, a memorial cylinder, etched not with melody, but with the names of those who guarded this lullaby's secret. Mrs. Montfort rose, her voice catching with emotion. "Yes, Hercule, I have had a cylinder fashioned from polished ivory, not for music, but as a vessel of remembrance. On its surface, each of us shall inscribe our name and a single word that embodies our role in this journey." She lifted a slender ivory cylinder from the table, its surface gleaming softly. Nurse Harriet will begin. With trembling precision, Nurse Harriet placed her hand on the cylinder and, using a fine stylus, engraved her name, followed by the word Vigilance. Tears flickered in her eyes, and she paused to compose herself before stepping back. Fides. Rhodes approached next, her slender fingers steady. She inscribed compassion beneath her own name, pausing to meet Eloise's gaze. For teaching the lullaby anew, she whispered. Captain Hastings stepped forward, carving loyalty, then smiled wryly. For watching the key turns and standing by through every midnight stakeout. Mr. Giles Harper, though still humbled, traced redemption under his name, lifting his head as though freeing himself from the shadow of past regrets. Finally, Poirot lifted the stylus. All eyes turned to him as he etched in graceful script truth. He placed his name above the epithet and paused. May this cylinder remain forever within the box, so that any who open it will be reminded that truth, like melody, must be protected in all its fragile beauty. Mrs. Montfort gently lifted the original metal cylinder from its case and placed it beside the ivory memorial one. And so, she said, her voice steady, I now return this box to its rightful place, in our home, no longer as a vessel of secrets, but as a shrine to memory. With care she closed the music box's lid, its polished surface reflecting each of their upturned faces. A hush fell, then Poirot spoke again, softer this time. Let Eloise wind the key. He handed her the music box's silver key. Eloise took it with solemn gravity and turned it once. A gentle click echoed in the silent room. Then a hush descended. The box did not sing, for its final cylinder held no melody, only names. Yet in that silence lay a requiem more profound than any tune. The coda of a case concluded and the triumph of human bonds restored. Mrs. Montfort embraced her daughter, tears shining in both their eyes. Nurse Harriet laid a comforting hand on Miss Rhodes's shoulder, as though to say forgiveness had sung its sweetest refrain. Hastings and Harper exchanged nods of mutual respect, and Poirot, his gaze drifting to the mantel where the grandmother's portrait looked on, allowed himself a rare, quiet smile. Outside, the rose garden beckoned with a gentle breeze that stirred petals like applause. Poirot stepped to the window and inhaled its floral sweetness. Hastings joined him. "And now, Hercule?" he asked in a low voice. Poirot's eyes gleamed with purpose. "Now, mon ami, we may finally rest until the next melody is lost, and the next secret awaits its true guardian." He turned back to the room where names lay inscribed upon ivory, each a silent promise to uphold the lullaby's legacy. But for tonight, let us savour the stillness that follows the last note. As afternoon, light kissed the edges of velvet curtains, the household dispersed to partake in the fete that would celebrate both spring and the enduring power of a single song. Eloise danced among the tables, her laughter mingling with the hum of guests. Nurse Harriet arranged more violets at the piano. Miss Rhodes rehearsed a new arrangement in her notebook. Mr. Harper stood sentinel by the door, his posture more relaxed, the weight of his transgression lifted. And Mrs. Montfort walked among her friends, a picture of serene grace, tempered by gratitude for every hand that had guided her through solitude and sorrow to this moment of communal joy. In the quiet of the drawing-room, Poirot lingered beside the music box's silent form. He placed a gentle hand on its lid, as though bidding farewell. Then, with a final nod to the portrait above the mantel, he turned and made his way toward the door, cloak sweeping behind him. Hastings joined him in the hallway. The front door swung wide, and the crisp air of Kensington filled the threshold. "Until next time, Hastings," Poirot said softly, tipping his hat. "Until next time, Hercule," Hastings replied, his voice warm with friendship. And with that, the case of the stolen lullaby, of hidden diaries, of trifoliate roses and crystal verses, reached its last note, its melody now woven into the fabric of a family's history, a shared legacy that no thief could ever steal again. Chapter 11. The Lullaby's Everlasting Echo. Morning light filtered softly through the lace curtains of a modest cottage on the outskirts of Oxford, where Eloise Montfort, no longer the wide-eyed child who first heard her grandmother's lullaby restored, now stood at the window, her reflection framed by climbing roses. Years had passed since the great concert at Kensington. Eloise, now 17 and a gifted cellist, had inherited her grandmother's gentle spirit and Miss Rhodes's creative spark. Today, however, her thoughts turned not to music, but to the secret she had carried all those seasons. The ivory memorial cylinder inscribed with the names of guardians, now safely enshrined in the Montfort Family Museum back in London. Within her heart, a new question stirred. How does one honour the past while composing the next verse of life? Eloise dressed in a simple navy frock and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear. She gathered her satchel and crossed the dew-damp lawn to the village green, where she would catch the early coach to Oxford Station. As she walked, her mind danced through memories. Nurse Harriet's loving vigil, Miss Rhodes's warm laughter, Hastings's gentle jokes, and above all, Poirot's guiding presence. She had resolved to write to the detectives, to invite them to her graduation recital, an event that would unite past and future, melody and memory. The journey by coach past fields waking to spring, hedgerows cloaked in primrose, and wood-pigeons calling their morning duet. Eloise's thoughts turned to her cello, which rested ahead of her at Mrs. Pemberton's music shop. She had spent years under Miss Rhodes's tutelage, mastering the instrument that would carry her lullaby forward into symphony halls. Today, she would select a new bow and trial a set of strings crafted in Cremona, dreaming that each resonant note might echo the gentle solace of her childhood's song. At the shop, Mrs. Pemberton greeted her with a warm smile. "My dear, ready for your recital?" Eloise nodded. As they adjusted bows and tested strings, Mrs. Pemberton handed her a small parcel. "A letter just came for you, addressed in fine handwriting." Eloise broke the seal to reveal an envelope bearing Poirot's familiar monogram. With trembling hands, she opened it and read, "My dearest Eloise, you move now into a world where melodies shape destinies. It would bring me great joy to attend your graduation recital in Oxford. Let us celebrate the lullaby's journey into your own music. I shall arrive on the evening of May 3rd and bring Hastings with me. Until then, May your little grey cells guide each bow-stroke with purpose and passion. Ever yours, Hercule Poirot. Tears of happiness brimmed in her eyes as she hurried home to prepare. That evening, Eloise stood before her mirror and donned a simple gown in midnight blue. A nod to the crystal cylinder's moonlit discovery, she tucked the letter in the pocket of her shawl and whispered a promise to the past, that every note she played would carry the legacy of truth and compassion imparted by those who had guarded her lullaby. On May 3rd, Oxford's Sheldonian Theatre, a venerable stone edifice bathed in lantern light, welcomed a hushed audience of family, friends and music lovers. Eloise stepped onto the stage, cello at her feet, and bowed at her family's applause. In the front row, she recognised Mrs. Montfort's proud smile, Miss Rhodes's gleaming eyes, Nurse Harriet's gentle nod, Giles Harper's discreet salute, and to her astonishment, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings, who rose to their feet in recognition. As the house lights dimmed, Eloise drew the bow across the strings, the opening bars of her programme. Bach's Cello Suite No. 1 flowed with clarity and grace. Each movement was a tribute to discipline learned under Miss Rhodes, to support offered by Nurse Harriet, and to the quiet loyalty of Giles Harper. Poirot listened, his little grey cells alight with admiration, while Hastings sat beside him, beaming with pride. For her final piece, Eloise had chosen an original composition, a theme and variations inspired by the 3 verses of the lullaby. First, the metal melody. Second, the Provençal refrain. And third, the crystalline whisper. As the first variation unfolded, the audience recognized the familiar minor sixth that had once unsettled young Eloise's dreams. The second variation blossomed into a major third's gentle warmth, echoing the joy of the recovered verse. And then, as the cello's timbre embraced the crystal motif, Eloise guided her music into the whispered third verse, its 9th note, flourish, ringing like a chime of silver. When the final note faded, the theatre held its breath before an eruption of applause swept through the hall. Poirot stood, tapping his gloved fingertips together in triumphant delight, while Hastings clapped with hearty enthusiasm. Eloise, cheeks flushed, released a trembling breath and bowed deeply, her eyes shining. Backstage, Poirot embraced her. "Ma chère, you have honoured the lullaby's legacy and composed a new verse of your own. This performance bridges past and future, an echo that will resound in the hearts of all who hear it." Hastings stepped forward to offer his congratulations, his eyes moist. Miss Rhodes and Nurse Harriet emerged with bouquets of lilies and violets, their smiles radiant. Mrs. Montfort enveloped her daughter in tears of joy, whispering, "You have brought our family's melody into a brighter dawn." That night, Poirot and Hastings found themselves at the Oxford Inn's fireside, mugs of hot punch in hand. Hastings sighed contentedly. "By Jove, Hercule, I've never been more proud. Eloise's journey from a stolen lullaby to this triumphant recital, remarkable." Poirot sipped his punch. "Yes, Hastings, it proves that when melody and memory entwine, they form a song that transcends time. Our little Irish friend has ensured that the lullaby's truth, compassion and courage continue to live in every note she plays." He tapped his gold watch. "But the hour grows late. Tomorrow I return to Baker Street. until the next mystery invites my little grey cells." Hastings raised his mug. "To next time, Hercule, and to the melodies that carry us forward." Outside, the moon climbed above Oxford's dreaming spires, casting its silver glow upon empty streets. Within the inn, the last embers of the fire glowed. And in the hearts of all who had witnessed Eloise's gift, the lullaby lived on, its echoes carrying onward, beyond garden gates, beyond stolen verses, into the ever-unfolding symphony of life. Chapter 12. The Lullaby's Final Dawn. The first pale light of morning crept over the rooftops of Oxford, weaving golden threads through the slender chimneys, and lighting in warmth the stone facades of its ancient colleges. In her modest rooms at the heart of the university town, Eloise Montfort lay awake in her four-poster bed, her cello resting like a trusted friend against the wall. The strains of Bach's Suite No. 1, which she had performed the previous evening, still whispered in her memory, mingled with the gentle notes of her grandmother's lullaby, and the crystalline third verse discovered beneath the trifoliate rose. Today she would rise to a new chapter of her life, one shaped by music, by the courage to uncover truth, and by the kindness of those who had guided her. She, dressed quietly in a navy gown, its simple cut reflecting her determination to walk her own path. Down the narrow stair she carried the small ivory cylinder, inscribed with the names and epithets of her guardians. Its surface warmed from where she had cradled it the night before. Nurse Harriet was already in the parlour, laying out tea, while Miss Rhodes arranged fresh violets on the piano. Mrs. Montfort, radiant in spring shades, greeted her with a proud smile. "Good morning, my darling," she said, pressing a kiss to Eloise's brow. "Today you stand at Oxford's threshold, your heart full of music and promise." Eloise returned her mother's embrace. "Every note I play is thanks to you all, Maman, for sharing the lullaby, for believing in me, and for welcoming Monsieur Poirot and Captain Hastings into our lives." She held out the ivory cylinder. "And this, our memorial cylinder, must find its final resting place today, where all may see it and remember what we have done." Mrs. Montfort nodded. "We shall place it in the Montfort Museum on Baker Street, alongside the metal and crystal cylinders and the diary. Its presence will stand as testament to the power of song and the bonds of trust." That afternoon, Eloise and her mother boarded the train bound for London, seated together amid the gentle clatter of the wheels on the rails. Hastings rode in the compartment opposite, reading the newspaper but glancing frequently toward Eloise's quiet figure, a faint smile on his lips. Miss Rhodes travelled on the opposite bench, offering her occasional encouragement as Eloise reviewed the third verse's notation. Nurse Harriet, clutching a small satchel, stood discreetly on the platform, waving until the train glided out of sight. Upon their arrival at Paddington, they found Poirot awaiting them. With his characteristic precision, he emerged from the crowd at exactly the moment the train glided in. His moustaches curved upward in delight as he stepped forward. "Ma chère Eloise, welcome home. And you, Madame Montfort, so gracious in your invitation. I trust your recital was met with the acclaim it deserved." Eloise beamed. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings was in the front row, clapping so loudly, I thought he would awaken the entire theatre." Hastings laughed. "You were magnificent, Eloise. You carried every audience member on the wings of your melody. Poirot touched his pince-nez. "And now, my friends, let us proceed to Baker Street. The museum awaits its final exhibit." The Montfort family's private gallery on Baker Street, a glass-fronted alcove in which treasures of their lineage were displayed, had never shone so brilliantly. Along the wall stood 4 ebony cabinets, the first housing the rosewood music box with its metal cylinder, the second preserving the Provençal manuscript and governess's diary, the third encasing the crystal cylinder beside a pressed trifoliate rose, and the fourth, newly added, awaiting its crowning exhibit. Poirot guided the party to the final cabinet. Eloise stepped forward, the ivory cylinder held reverently in her hands. Mrs. Montfort drew a slender key from her jewellery box, polished, silver gleaming. Poirot and Hastings stood behind the group in respectful silence as Miss Rhodes and Nurse Harriet flanked Eloise. With her mother's encouragement, Eloise inserted the key and turned it gently. The cabinet's door swung open on invisible hinges to reveal a velvet-lined niche just wide enough to cradle the cylinder. Eloise laid the ivory piece upon its cushion. Hastings produced a small plaque, which he affixed to the cabinet's door. In honour of all who guarded the Lullaby's truth, Nurse Harriet, vigilance, Miss Emmeline Rhodes, compassion, Captain Arthur Hastings, loyalty, Mr. Giles Harper, redemption, and Hercule Poirot, truth. Displayed here as the memorial cylinder, may their names rest in harmony for generations to come. As the final rivet clicked home, a hush enveloped the gallery. Poirot surveyed the assembled faces, each illuminated by pride, affection, and a shared sense of destiny. Poirot cleared his throat. "Allow me, mes amis, to offer a few words." He turned to Eloise. "You, mademoiselle, have shown that a melody, once thought lost, may be recovered not solely by keen observation, but by courage, by compassion, and by the generosity to share its burden. This memorial cylinder stands as proof that music, like truth, belongs to all who listen and to all who care to keep it alive." He dipped his head. The gallery remained silent but vibrant with promise, as though every musical note extracted from the cylinders still lingered in the air. That evening, the Montfort home on Baker Street welcomed a small gathering of invited friends. The local schoolmaster, the naively curious art dealer who had first admired the trifoliate rose, and a few illustrious guests from the British Museum. Over trays of dainty sandwiches and crystal glasses of elderflower cordial, Mrs. Montfort led a brief tour of the gallery, recounting each chapter of her family's odyssey. Eloise, standing by the final cabinet, recited the 3 verses of the Lullaby, her voice carrying every nuance of metal's clarity, folk's warmth, and crystal's ethereal ring. Miss Rhodes accompanied her on the pianoforte for the first 2 verses. Then, as Eloise cued Nurse Harriet to wind the crystal cylinder, the guest of honour lifted the lid. The 3rd verse, in fragile Provençal, drifted above their heads. "Under moonlit veil, the heart shall sing, a trinity of petals, a single ring. The song reborn from crystal's gleam keeps love alive in every dream." The assembled company, kind, neighbours and esteemed scholars alike, could only watch in rapt silence, their eyes fixed upon the music box, Eloise's luminous presence, and the final memorial cylinder, a quiet testament to how far that lullaby had travelled. When the last chord faded, applause rose like a wave, carrying laughter and tears in equal measure. Hastings clapped his friend Poirot on the shoulder. "You dazzled them, Hercule. I suspect the British Museum will ask to display our cylinder as well." Poirot's moustaches twitched in amusement. "Perhaps, but for now, this cylinder belongs to the Montfort family." He looked to Eloise, "and to you, mademoiselle, whose voice has given it life once more." Eloise curtsied, cheeks aflame with gratitude. Late that night, after the guests had departed and the candlelight guttered low, Eloise found herself unable to sleep. She crept to the gallery, drawn by a silent longing to witness her lullaby's legacy one last time. There, beneath the protective glass, the 4 cylinders stood in perfect alignment: metal, crystal, metal linked to glass, and ivory linked to memory. Eloise pressed her hand to the glass, recalling every triumphant moment. The thefts that had threatened her peace, the secret passages that had concealed her family's truths, the kindnesses that had redeemed pride, and the final gesture that had united them all. In the hush, she whispered the lullaby's 3 verses, her voice steady even in the night's solitude, and as the words echoed in the empty gallery, she felt a gentle breeze, as though the trifoliate rose outside had opened to touch her with moonlit petals, reminding her that music, once set free, carries on beyond the boundaries of any single life. Eloise turned to leave, pausing beside the ivory cylinder. She pressed her fingertips to its polished surface and said softly, "I promise to carry your song onward, always." Then she closed the gallery door behind her, leaving the cylinders to their silent vigil. Back in bed, Eloise finally slept, her dreams filled with rose gardens, moonlight, and the enduring echo of a lullaby reborn again and again. And in Baker Street, Hercule Poirot, at rest in his armchair, let the fire's embers glow, content that yet another secret had found its rightful place, and that sometimes the sweetest mysteries resolve not in villainy and blood, but in the gentle embrace of a shared melody carried on ever onward into dawn's final hush. Chapter 13. The Everlasting Lullaby. A soft breeze carried the scent of late spring through the open windows of Baker Street, as Hercule Poirot returned to his comfortable flat, the echoes of Eloise Montfort's triumphant recital still resonating in his mind. The case of the stolen lullaby, now woven into legend, had reached its grand finale, yet he felt in his bones that its true denouement lay not in resolution, but in the promise of songs yet to be sung. With a final glance at the display cabinet, where metal, crystal, and ivory cylinders stood in silent testament, Poirot placed a small handkerchief atop its glass, a quiet salute to the melodies and memories preserved within. The morning after the gala at the Montfort Museum, Poirot had breakfast with Captain Hastings, each savouring whispers of lavender tea and buttered toast. Hastings pored over the newspapers announcing Eloise's success at Oxford, and the public's embrace of her 3-verse lullaby, noting letters of praise from families whose children had found comfort in the newly published recordings. Yet, beneath Hastings's cheerful commentary lay a familiar eagerness. Would there be another case tomorrow? Another mystery to tease out with little grey cells? Poirot, ever inscrutable, simply tapped his moustaches and replied, "Perhaps, Hastings, but for now let the world rest in melody." Across town, Eloise Montfort stepped into the morning light, accompanied by Miss Emmeline Rhodes and Nurse Harriet. Their footsteps echoed on the cobblestones as they made their way to the Montfort Family Museum, where the memorial cylinder had found its final place. Eloise paused before the glass case, her hand tracing the etched epithet Truth beneath Poirot's name, and felt a swell of gratitude for every guardian whose vigilance, compassion, loyalty, redemption, and integrity had safeguarded her lullaby. She resolved then to honour their legacy by teaching music to local children each summer, ensuring the lullaby's verses would bloom in new hearts each spring. In the museum's curator's office, Mrs. Montfort sat at her desk reviewing letters from schools requesting permission to hold lullaby concerts of their own. She smiled at the sight of kids' drawings of trifoliate roses and notes scrawled in childish script, searching for the secret verse. She penned a reply inviting each school to apply for a small grant to reproduce the Provençal manuscript's facsimile. As she sealed the envelope, she thought of her grandmother, whose sacrifice had given her life, and whose final gift had sung across centuries, and felt certain that through song, love and truth would endure. Meanwhile, Giles Harper, restored to his role as butler, and now fully accepted into the Montfort household, took up a new position as caretaker of the museum's music archives. Each morning he polished the display cabinets with renewed pride, knowing that his redemption had been earned not by rank or status, but by humility and service. When children visited the museum and asked about the cylinder's memorial, he regaled them not with tales of scandal, but with a message of hope, that even the gravest errors may be redeemed by honesty and courage. On Baker Street, Hastings and Poirot concluded their breakfast. Hastings toyed with his teacup, brow thoughtful. "Hercule, do you ever wonder what becomes of a mystery when it's solved? The world moves on, but somewhere the ripples persist." Poirot nodded, pointedly stirring his chocolate. "Ah, but, Hastings, a truly good mystery does not vanish. It transforms into a story passed from heart to heart. The lullaby, our case, lives on in every child who sleeps to its melody." He lifted his cup. "To transformation, mon ami. Across London, the little cylinder boxes, metal, crystal, and ivory, found new homes in town halls, schools, and libraries. Each was accompanied by a plaque bearing the story of the stolen lullaby and its triumphant recovery. Children learned the Provençal verses in music classes. Scholars wrote papers on the cipher in the third verse, and parents tucked their youngsters into bed with the lullaby's gentle notes, never again to forget how music can heal wounds invisible to the eye. In Oxford, Eloise continued her studies, earning scholarships and admirers in equal measure. She formed a chamber ensemble dedicated to neglected folk songs, each performance evoking the spirit of her grandmother's lullaby. Letters arrived from far corners of the British Empire. Prisoners in India longing to hear the lullaby unrecorded, gramophone records, children in Canada requesting sheet music, and mothers in Australia reporting that the lullaby had soothed their infants through storms and sickness alike. Eloise read each letter in wonder, aware that the melody had become larger than herself, a thread connecting lives across oceans. Nurse Harriet, now known affectionately as Auntie Harriet by neighbourhood children, organised a Sunday afternoon music circle at the local parish hall. Around tea and biscuits, she taught simple rounds of the lullaby to newcomers, weaving in stories of the trifoliate rose and the moonlit bench in the Montfort garden. When a child's voice cracked or a note wobbled, she reminded them gently that every heart sings imperfectly, and that in imperfection lay the beauty of humanity's shared song. Miss Rhodes, having published her own arrangement of the lullabies, second and third verses, embarked on a European tour as a concert pianist. She performed in Paris, Lyon and Marseille, pausing in Provence to visit the hillside abbey where her namesake troubadours once composed folk songs. At each venue, she recited the story of the stolen lullaby, the hidden third verse, and the Rose of Trifolia, bringing tears and standing ovations wherever she played. At her final concert in Avignon, she concluded with the crystal third verse alone, her pianissimo bow echoing like the softest chime above an audience entranced. Back in Kensington, Mrs. Montfort oversaw the publication of a beautifully bound book, La Berceuse de l'Étoile, Chronicle of a Lullaby. It contained facsimiles of the Provençal manuscript, the governess's diary entries, photographs of the trifoliate rose and the moon garden bench, and interviews with Nurse Harriet, Miss Rhodes, Hastings, Harper, and above all, Eloise. A foreword by Hercule Poirot reflected on the case's lessons, that love may conceal as well as heal, that a melody can carry truth, and that, at the heart of every mystery, lies the music of the human soul. Poirot, too, received occasional letters, thank you, notes, invitations to recitals, and the occasional request for consultation on rare musical mysteries. He answered each with courtesy and discretion, his little grey cells ever alert. Yet he found equal satisfaction in his morning walks through Hyde Park, where the birds' songs and the distant strains of buskers' fiddles formed an ever-changing symphony. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves turned gold and scarlet, Eloise arrived at Baker Street with her cello strapped to her back. She had come to present Poirot with a gift, her first professional recording of the lullaby's 3 verses, on a gleaming vinyl disc. The label bore an inscription, "To Hercule, Poirot, whose kindness restored a world of song." She placed the disc in his waiting hands. Poirot cradled it reverently. "Ma chère, your music honours not only the lullaby, but the principle that every melody, no matter how fragile, deserves its guardian." He settled into his armchair and placed the record on the phonograph. As the first crackle gave way to the opening bar, each listener felt the familiar minor sixth leap, the warm major third, and then the crystalline third verse shimmering like morning dew. Captain Hastings, summoned by the music's arrival, settled beside them. "There's nothing like it, Hercule. This lullaby has outlived thieves and secrets, and now it fills every corner of life with its grace." Poirot closed his eyes, fingertips lightly tapping the armrest. "Yes, Hastings, in the end it is the melody we reclaim, the song that endures. For as long as it is sung, the lullaby lives on beyond our deeds. And so, our case, once defined by the theft of a simple tune, has become a testament to music's power to bind hearts, reveal truths, and carry us toward new dawns." And with that, as the harper's clock in the corner chimed noon, Poirot allowed himself a rare contentment, knowing that some mysteries, once solved, transform into legacies, everlasting songs that echo not only through rooms and gardens, but through every listening heart for evermore.